Hello everyone, welcome to this workshop on activism. I am really excited for all of you to be here and to get to do this with you. So I've organised this so it's going to be around an hour and a half worth of workshops. So if you're joining me live, then hello, very excited for the next kind of 60 to 90 minutes. If you are watching this afterwards, after it's been live on my channel, then I'm very excited for you to work through this yourselves or with friends. So without further ado, let us get to it. So basically this workshop is one that I used to run in schools and with activist groups at universities and at events. And it is normally done in person, and it's normally done with small breakout groups. So people are able to discuss things together and throw around ideas. Obviously that's not going to be possible right now. Even if I was doing it, wanted to do it in an outside event, then that is not something that I could do, unfortunately. So what we are going to do instead is kind of try and replicate that. So for those of you who are joining us live, please put all of the different answers to the activities we're going to do today in the live chat and kind of share ideas. And if you're not sure, ask each other questions. And if you are joining after it has gone live, when it's on my channel, then put your answers in the comments. Or even if you're wanting to kind of replicate that small group structure that I normally do, ask some friends or family or people around you to do this workshop with you and kind of see what you come up with together. Whether you have the same cause or a different cause you're interested in. So what we'll be doing today is basically going through a series of activities, and each of these activities builds on the last one. So we'll kind of start on with a very specific point, and then each one will start to build information or skills, so that by the end of this workshop you'll essentially have a list of actionable points going forwards to actually start you off on this journey. It's worth noting that the intended audience for this workshop is generally people who are just starting to get into activism or starting to be interested in it, but I've also run it for groups who are more established activists as a way of kind of really thinking hard about your activism and kind of focusing the work that you want to do next or the project that you want to focus on next. And then the last thing to note, which is important, is that I'm going to be giving some different examples today, and they will not apply to everyone. So for one, they might not apply because of the particular country or state that you're in. So for example, if I'm talking about voting, that is not something that is available to particular people in different countries. If you are incarcerated or even formally incarcerated in some places, you do not have the right to vote. And that might indeed be one of the issues that you care about and that you want to work towards changing. There will also be some things that I won't have mentioned, some ideas I won't have come up with. So this is not an exhaustive list, the kind of stuff we're talking about. This is just to kind of get some ideas going. So if you do think of anything that isn't mentioned, please feel free to put it in the comments or in the live chat if you're watching live. So the first thing that I want to talk about is research. So no matter the cause or the issue that you're interested in, the first thing that you're going to want to do is research, and you're going to want to keep that process going and keep learning. The knowledge is power saying, chef's kiss, it is indeed true. Even if this is an issue, the thing that you're interested in is an issue that you directly experience, there will always be new studies and statistics that might be useful to your activism, new information, new writing, new perspectives. And people with different perspectives than yours who also are experiencing the same issue. Because you also want to make sure that your learning leaves room for other causes and issues, right? This is all a web, a net. I don't think I can think of an example of any cause or issue that does not overlap with another one in some way, shape or form. And I think in general, trying to do this in your everyday life will make you a better person. It will make you a better friend and colleague, but it will also make you a better activist, because it can inform your activism and advocacy by acknowledging these kind of connected systems. you can see the different issues and causes that intersect with your own. So a really good example of this is breast cancer. You could be someone who thinks, well, there's not really another cause that intersects with breast cancer other than stuff that's specifically in the medical field. But you know, there have been studies done in a lot of places, including the UK, that found that Black women are more at risk of cancer, breast cancer. And that knowledge should have an impact on your work, right? It should have impact if you're doing an awareness campaign around breast cancer, if you're doing fundraising. That should be something that should be informing what you're doing, who you're talking to, and the way you go about it. So I'm assuming in this workshop that the issue you'll be focusing on is one that you will have some knowledge on. But what I do want you to do is to make a note of, if we go along and there are gaps missing in your knowledge, make a note of them so that you can research them later. And that's a super important thing to look at. So let's talk about our first activity, exercise that we're going to do going forwards. And this is deciding on a cause. So as I kind of hinted at before, causes can be something that you have directly experienced, that you have direct lived experience of. It could be something that a loved one has experienced, something that you've read about, seen on the news, something that you've raised money for, that you've heard about. All of these things are completely valid things for you to want to change, fight. So the first exercise is going to be actually writing those down. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to essentially, as it says here, write down the cause or causes you're interested in focusing on right now. And you might be someone who has a ton. You might be someone who's like, oh God, there's so much injustice. I must help all of it. For this exercise now, that's fine. Write all of those down. You might be someone who has a very specific thing that you're interested in. So I know that I've kind of got a few more steps ahead on this slide, but for now I just want you to focus on the activity A. So write down the cause or causes you're interested in focusing on right now. You don't have to pick a focus right now, just write those down. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. So hopefully you guys have thought of some issues. If you haven't, don't worry, you can kind of keep going with that initial thought through this next portion of the exercise. So we're moving on to activity 1B, narrowing down your cause to something as specific as you can. You might have a few different specific issues you're interested in, so feel free to list a few options for yourself. Get as specific as you can. You can always branch out later. And I've done a quick example of something happening in the world right now and how you might specify that, right? So if, for example, racism was one of the things you put down, you might specify that specifically to anti-Black racism. Well, there are lots of different ways in which that manifests in the world, so what specifically do you want to focus on? This isn't to say this is the most important issue that can come down from this big umbrella term of racism. It's just one that you personally are interested in, or angry about, or that you just want to focus on. So police brutality being one that's obviously very prevalent and relevant right now. But that's also quite big as a concept. So going down more into lack of accountability for Black deaths in police custody, and then focusing even more to your local area, whether that's your county or state or country, depending on where you live. So you can see how something that's a very, very big umbrella term can be more and more focused. And I've put a tip here, which is try narrowing down based on asking questions. So who is affected by this? Where are they affected? When are they affected? How are they affected? Hopefully by asking yourself some of those questions, you can make it more specific. So another example I can give as you're doing this is from a workshop that I ran a few years ago, which was in a university, and there were some students there whose big umbrella topic was transphobia. And they basically narrowed it down to actually what we want to focus on is the knowledge and education of lecturers within our university, improving that so that they are able to interact with trans students in a respectful way, and that they feel empowered to potentially look at including more trans texts or histories within the classes that they're doing. So you can see how that's very specific, but that is what you want. You do not want to have a topic which is so big that there's like no possible way for you to fight it, and specifically no possible way for you to know if you have succeeded. So I'm going to give you another few minutes to basically narrow down as much as possible the thing that you are interested in, the thing that you're going to go. This doesn't have to be the thing that you're promising yourself to. This is just for this particular workshop, the one that you want to focus on. So we're going to go a few minutes on that as well. And I'm going to jump into the live chat while we do this. So if there's any questions, post them in there and I will hopefully be able to help out. So I'm going to say, for those of you who I've seen a couple of examples put into the chat, who have decided on a focus, as a little exercise in the next sort of 3 minutes that we're still going on this activity, try and narrow it down even more. So if you think you've got it as small as possible, just as a hypothetical, try narrowing it down even more and see what you can come up with. you might not end up using the thing that's overly specific, but it's better, I think, to get specific as possible and then be able to branch out rather than starting at a place where it's too big and it gets very overwhelming when you try and actually nail down what are you going to do, what are you going to put into action with this cause. So for those who are not watching this live and so can't see the chat, if you need any sort of ideas, I'm going to read a couple of ones from the chat that we currently have because they're really brilliant. So Drew has focused specifically on the lack of social, financial and educational support for Indigenous peoples within their area specifically. Really good idea. We have Eli talking about misconceptions about the type of trans-specific healthcare available in the NHS, specifically around trans youth. That's really exciting and obviously very relevant to what's happening at the moment as well. Theatonin, ableism in physical education classes in school. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Maybe try and focus that in more. So where would you like to start with that? So this doesn't have to be your be all and end all cause, but you might start with specifically your school that you're in at the moment, or a school that you teach in, or a particular area where you grew up where you know the education system really well. Again, if you're struggling to make it more specific, then really focus in on those, those questions of who, where, when, how. So if you have not put anything about where you're going to be focusing on in a geographic sense in your cause, try putting it in. So if you just said something about mental health, education or awareness, but where in a particular country, a particular city, a particular area, a particular organisation. It might be that you want to focus specifically on your place of work, for example. It's coming up to the last 20 seconds or so, so finish up putting down the specific cause that you are interested in. So you've got that ready to go for this next activity. Okay, so those were some really amazing ideas in the chat, and I'm sure those of you who are kind of working on this, not live, have come up with some really great ideas as well. Next, what we're going to talk about is something a little bit, we're kind of like going off to the side slightly, but it's all obviously going to be relevant, and that is your skills, experience, and resources. So basically, we're going to look at what you can bring to the table, what you have at your disposal. And I think that this is really important to talk about because everyone's different, right? Everyone has different skills and passions and interests. And there are some things that we don't necessarily think of as being activist things. And I feel like that maybe even more is a feeling that we get when we're living through very public protests and that kind of work, which can feel very activisty. And there are obviously various reasons why that is not possible. I mean, right now there is obviously a global pandemic going on, but in general, a lot of these protests and marches are very inaccessible, especially to people who use wheelchairs or have mobility issues and so can't be going on this super, super long march. And if someone is organising a protest who hasn't thought about those things, then that might not be a way in which they are able to get involved. So there are other ways that you might want to get involved instead. So I've put some examples down here. Money, so giving to a cause. There's been a lot of bail funds, for example, that have come out recently that people have been able to give to. Time, volunteering time is something that's really important. Space, if you have somewhere where people can gather, that is extremely useful. A printer, like all of these things are stuff that might not seem so obviously helpful, but actually the amount of money that you can spend printing out flyers, if no one has a printer and you've got to go to a shop, is going to take money away from other elements of your cause. So other stuff: first-hand knowledge or experience, artistic skills, research skills, public speaking skills, baking skills, listening skills, TikTok video creation and editing skills. These may not seem like on the surface when you first think about them sort of activist skills, but these are all going to be relevant in some way. Pretty much any skill that you have is going to be relevant in some way or can be useful. So the first task that we're going to do within this section is to make a list of the skills and resources that you have. Again, as I said, it doesn't have to be obviously applicable to activism and protest. In fact, put activism and protest out of your mind and just think about your skills, experience, resources, and what you can bring to the table. So we're going to go with 5 minutes for this. And within that 5 minutes, also do activity B, which is choosing the top 3 and writing them in the comments or in the chat. So the 3 things that you think are your strongest, and also things that you enjoy as well. Kind of strike that balance. There will often be things that you are good at or that you have at your disposal, but they aren't necessarily the things that are going to energize you and excite you. So always be thinking about that at the same time. You know, sometimes there's a subject at school that you're really good at, but you are like, I don't even like this. I can do it, but I would rather be doing anything else. So take that into account when you're picking your top 3. So we're going to do 5 minutes of this. And again, I will be in the chat now. So if you have any questions, let me know. So again, for those of you who are watching this not live, I will read some stuff out from the live chat just in case it is useful to you. Things you might not have thought of if you're struggling. So there's a few people here. Nula, I think, Nula. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And Theotonin again talked about sending emails, being comfortable sending emails. That is a really useful one, actually. Someone who has those writing skills and communication skills can be super, super useful. We also have Abigail talking about web design skills, project management. Those 2 are so, so useful. Being able to design something which is going to be eye-catching, which is going to be informative, is so, so useful. Thomas again talking about project management. Yeah, if you are someone who can organize people, who can delegate, who can be on top of things, that is going to be something amazing that you can bring to the table. Pale Ghosty, amazing screen name, talking about social media management or events management. Again, events are more complicated than they may seem at first. Some of you may know, run a creative retreat every year with my co-organizer Krish, who is one of my favorite people in the world. And it's a tough one trying to organize all of the the insurance side of things, as well as creating an atmosphere, as well as creating good programming and getting people involved and advertising that it's even happening so that people turn up. So that's always going to be really useful. we have, and I'm going to butcher this name, McGeewee, not entirely sure how to pronounce it, talking about being able to, having use of a vehicle, being able to drive, first aid skills. Those are practical skills that are amazing. Super, super useful. Lilacs Moon again, first aid skills. Something that you may not think of at first, but if you're going to be running a big event, you're going to want to ensure that you have people who can keep other people safe. That can be really useful. We're seeing a lot of people with first aid skills and medical training at protests at the moment, but it may be something that you don't necessarily need to be able to be someone who can handle going to a protest to use those. Sometimes a lot of venues and events will require you to have someone with first aid training to be there, even if it isn't a protest, even if it's just a summer fete. Got about 30 seconds left to finish this activity for those who are watching this live. Obviously, if you're not, you can pause this. That is also an option that's available to you if you need a little bit more time. Big bra moment, the ability to hear people out. These kind of communication abilities and communication skills are so important. If you are someone who knows that you are a peacekeeper, you are someone who is able to try and sort out potential tensions within a group, that's also really important. So I want you to think now that you've kind of written down this list and particularly your top 3. Think about the things that you don't have. You know, what people might you need to collaborate with because you do not have those skills, experiences, or resources. So is it that you have a lot of time but don't necessarily have money or finances? Do you have a lot of artistic skills but you don't have the research skills to get the information that you can put into your art? So just have a think, and this is kind of an exercise to take with you outside of this workshop. By looking at your skills, what are the things that you don't have access to? What are the things that you would need, the kind of people you would need to collaborate with in order to make what you want to happen. So the next activity we're going to look at is looking at what kind of person you are. So this is really, really important because, as I mentioned before, with your skills and resources, you want to be able to find something which energizes you, which excites you, that is kind of who you naturally are. And so I'm going to read this list of words, and you can read them on the screen. And I want you to make 3 columns or 3 lists, depending on, and put these words into those columns. The first column being, yes, this is me. So, you know, absolutely, that word or that identity or that phrase really resonates with me, however you read that phrase or that word. No, this definitely isn't me. There's no way I could be this person. Or 3, it depends on the circumstances. And I really encourage you to be honest with yourself here. Not who you ideally would be, not who you aspire to be, but who you are right now with the kind of person you are right now. So those words are connector. So that might be someone who can connect different groups, different people, different resources. Connector. Which one of those 3 columns are you going to put it in? Organizer. That might be of people, of events, of time management, of schedules. Could be any of those. Organizer. Teacher. Are you someone who can understand and disseminate information to people? Are you someone who can express facts and knowledge in an engaging way? Are you a teacher? Or researcher. You don't necessarily have to be able to present it to people, but can you deep dive into resources? Can you look at studies and figure out how reliable they are, so you're giving the very best information to people? Speaker, are you someone who is able to talk in front of a crowd, who is able to be engaging, a face of a movement? Are you someone who can talk to journalists? Are you someone who feels comfortable and confident in this kind of space? Healer, so this might be someone, you might read this as being someone who has knowledge of first aid, like we talked about a couple of minutes ago. Or you might be an emotional healer. You might be someone who is able to pacify, who is able to, if tensions are rising, calm people. Or someone who has a lot of knowledge and thoughts around trauma and that kind of healing. You're a healer. How about a risk taker? Whatever that means to you. Are you someone who is going to take that leap? Is going to say, well, this is something I'm willing to put myself on the line for this. A crafter or an artist? Are you someone who has that kind of ability? Someone who can make things? Are you the person who's going to be making these amazing protest signs or this brilliant graphic design for sharing on social? You're a crafter. How about communicator? Someone who can write the emails, write the letters, someone who can take the information from the researcher and put it into a digestible form. Or someone who's good at communicating face-to-face with people. Are you someone who would be good at canvassing, for example? Are you a communicator? So again, have a look at these words and sort them into the columns. And then I'm also going to give you about 3 minutes to do that, and also to think about other words that you can come up with on your own that describe roles that reflect you and your personality and what excites you and energizes you and the kind of stuff that you would enjoy doing. So I'm going to put, let's do 3 minutes on that. And again, I'm going to go back into the live chat. We're going to have a look at some ideas we can share with those of you who aren't going to be looking at this live and kind of answer any questions. This is in reference to the last one, but S.O. Sullivan. Oh yeah, I can speak several languages. I forgot that was a skill. Yes, absolutely. And actually translation work is so important for this, especially if you live in a country that has got large, or a city or a community which has large populations of people who don't speak the kind of majority language. Or even particularly maybe in your area, the majority language is not the same as the country at large or the state at large. Being able to translate that information is so useful. Or also a different kind of translating, I guess, than what you might expect. People who know sign language, people who are able to transcribe, able to do that kind of communication that makes something easier for people with disabilities. That's something really useful as well. Chara Trice says, I think the role of a promoter could be useful. Absolutely, that's a really interesting one. That's something that potentially think of more as something linked to, I guess, like events, club nights, that kind of stuff when I think of the word promoter. But yeah, if you're someone who can get people to where you want them to be, to a rally, to a protest, to a fundraiser, so useful. Got another minute to just add in some more words that describe your personality and excite you. Or if you want to actually think of some more words that you would put in that definitely not column. It's also really useful to think about things that are absolutely not who you are, that you definitely are uncomfortable with, so that you can have those limits and barriers to say, actually, I know and I'm comfortable enough in myself to say, I am not a good speaker. I cannot speak in front of people. But if you need someone to be in the back, making signs or researching, that I can do, but I can't be involved in an organization that's going to mean I have to be speaking, for example. Cool. And now I'm going to give you guys a few more minutes to do this B section of this activity. So looking at the words in your depends column and writing down or deciding, what changes that depends to a yes or a no. So being specific about, for example, it depends on the circumstances. A speaker, you might say, I am not comfortable speaking in front of a large crowd, but I would feel comfortable doing something like this, what I'm doing, talking to someone in a workshop setting or talking to someone one-to-one. Or a healer, you could say, well, I can do first aid, I'm a first aider, but I would not feel comfortable being the only person able to do that. I feel much more comfortable when there is a first aid team available, things like that. So I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to do that B part of the exercise. And hopefully what you'll see from this exercise is that maybe the traditional ideas about what you think someone who is an activist or an advocate does or is not necessarily just one thing. These movements need a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, and people can't do everything, and they shouldn't be doing everything. People have different skills, different gifts, and being really honest with yourself about what yours are means that you're going to be able to bring your best self to those groups. So some ideas from the chat if people need them. Charlie and Ursula are both talking about the idea of, they're interested in being a teacher, but they would need help with the organising of what or how to teach. Ursula's saying, that was originally had a hesitation towards saying teacher, but if they had some resources, then that's probably where they would gravitate. And that's really useful to know. If you feel really confident in your skills as a teacher, you know that you want to collaborate or link up with someone who is a researcher maybe, or an organizer or a communicator who's going to be able to provide those resources. And I want you to think now, just for the last sort of 30 seconds of this exercise, how this exercise and the last ones link up together. So are you someone who is amazing at baking, has good translation skills, and also sees yourself as someone who connects people together? They might not really obviously fit together, but there might be something there. There might be something that you think, oh, wait, this is a role that I can take. This is something that I can do. Because if you've got baking skills, then that can become a bake sale fundraiser for a particular cause, if it's relevant. It can become someone who makes meals and takes them to protesters, or people who are doing sit-ins, for example. It can be someone who just generally is making meals for people who are doing work on a tight deadline. Some people who are working within the context of an election, for example. So this skill that on the surface doesn't seem like it's a sort of hard activist skill can actually be extremely useful with propping up this web that is making change. So now that you've kind of got this idea of what your cause is, and then also your skills, experience, resources, the kind of person you are, I'm going to talk a little bit now about finding your pace. This is a nice little acronym because we love a bit of that. So basically, I have come up with this extremely catchy acronym, but basically because there are 4 areas of change making that I think pretty much everything that we do in this sort of activist space will fit into, right? So there's politics and policy, advocacy and direct action, charities and kind of non-profits, NGOs, and education. So what I'm going to do is essentially go through each of these in turn, give you some examples of ways in which that might be able to help a cause. And what I want you to do is, as I'm kind of going through and giving examples, jot down any that you think might be relevant to your cause, might be useful, whether it's something that you think you can achieve or something that might generally be useful, or that someone else might be able to achieve that you could help with. Because these are not all going to be relevant to all issues. But a lot of them will be, and a lot of them will intersect together, right? So you might need education and policy together. You might need direct action and charity fundraising. Those things might not be mutually exclusive. So I'm basically going to go through each of these in turn and give you some examples. But you may also be able to think of some other examples within these 4 different areas, which might also be helpful. So feel free to write those down and put them in the chat or in the comments as well. So politics and policy. Voting. Mentioned that right at the beginning, but from a national level and also a local election, by-election, midterms, whatever you have in your country, voting is a way in which you can be involved within a change-making process to a more or less degree depending on where you live and the kind of voting that's happening there. But that is an example. Contacting officials. We've seen a lot of this recently, people giving kind of email templates out. Ideally, you probably want to ring people and keep ringing them, things that you do regularly. Attending meetings in person when there are meetings that you can attend, local meetings, council meetings, things like that. Becoming the person who's known for caring about this issue that you care about. And also personalising those emails, not doing a rote email that's easy to ignore or to put into the spam folder. To that end, you could be the person who writes templates or scripts for people that they can use an email or phone calls. If people feel really nervous about being on a phone call, not knowing how to respond to people, giving them a script to follow can be really useful. Volunteering with political organisations, that might be party political organisations or political organisations in a different way. So people who are campaigning at the moment for voting for 16-year-olds, for example. That's a very policy-driven kind of cause. Also things that are more soft skill stuff, so talking to people about what's going on politically and about how they're voting, friends and family, encouraging them to get involved, encouraging them to learn about the different policies of the different parties that they might want to vote for in a way which is, actually looking at the manifesto, looking at their promises. Another one of this one might seem pretty extreme, but run for office. And this might be running for office on a very small scale. So, for example, at your university, you might have elections, going for positions where you can make a change there, or within your local community. So there are organisations who support people who traditionally are from backgrounds that are not represented within our representatives. Or people who are quite young. We've obviously had a lot of very young politicians coming up in the UK and the US actually in the last few years. So these are all the ways, a few different ways in which politics and policy based actions might be able to help with different causes. So again, for this, write down any that you think are relevant to you in particular. Advocacy and direct action. So one thing to research with this is who is already doing the work. I think for a lot of people, it's quite tempting to say, I will do a big protest. I will organise big stuff. But actually, there's probably groups who are doing this already. There's probably groups who have already been trying to set this up or change this. And so joining them rather than trying to strike it on your own without really knowing how is going to be the best thing to do. So things you could do, join local movements that already exist, start local, start really small in your particular place where you live might be a useful place to go. Attend protests, sit-ins, marches, awareness-raising events, strikes, occupations. These are all different ways of showing direct action. Help organise these actions. So if you're someone who actually wants to help with that, we've just talked about different ways in which you could help, which maybe aren't the traditional ways. You might be an organiser figure, and so for that doesn't necessarily mean that you're one of the people at the top organising, but you might be someone who likes the organisational task of working out what parade routes have been done before in your city and what would be a good route to march down for various reasons, or a timetable. What is it, kind of how long should the march be? What other things might happen? Are we going to have a rally? How are we going to get the mic from this place to this place? Do we have enough people to drive people? That kind of organisation is crucial. Providing medical care, childcare, legal support for people who are protesting. So you might get involved in direct action not by actually going to a march, but by providing vital support behind the scenes for those people. Putting together supplies for events, so putting together packs that people are going to need if they're going somewhere doing something. Volunteering as a driver, we talked about this earlier as well, people who have access to vehicles, especially like vans or trucks where you can transport stuff as well as people. Creating graphics, shareable info about actions that people are taking on social media. So useful for spreading the word outside of the people who are directly involved, or to bring more people to the cause. Becoming a source of accurate and detailed information that can help protesters or inform charities or political groups in their work. That is so useful. If you are someone who has a direct experience with the cause that you're interested in, being someone who is able to talk about that thing and provide first-hand information is really crucial. And the last one is there's a lot of activist groups, advocacy groups that have e-campaign newsletters. So they'll send out, you sign up, and every week or 2 weeks they'll send you an email with different petitions that need signing, stuff that needs donating to, actions that are being taken. So that can be something that you could create or something that you can look into for the particular cause you're interested in. So the next one, charities, NGOs, non-profits. Again, ask yourself who is already doing the work here. So you might want to fundraise. You might say, actually, there's a group that's doing really good work in this. I'm going to actually try and fundraise to make sure that they have enough money to keep going and doing the work that they're doing with the issue I care about. That's kind of like a big event and a one-off donation, but you might also want to set up direct debits, donating money monthly. I know that, if you use particular money apps, you can put a pot together which rounds up all of the purchases you make to the nearest pound or dollar, and all that change goes into a pot in your account, and you can just say, well, every month I'm going to donate all that money to the particular cause. Volunteer your time, volunteer your expertise. So those kind of skills we were talking about earlier, what's something of that you could donate? If you don't necessarily have the time to come and physically volunteer somewhere, what can you do with your expertise? And then the last one, kind of similar to this running for office thing, consider working for a charity or for the third sector, an NGO. This is something that a lot of people I know struggle with, where they are so invested within a movement that they end up working for an organisation full time, and then they feel like they have to do activist stuff on top of it. But actually, the work that you're doing for that charity, for that cause, is the work, and that's okay. So you might be someone who's interested in marketing. My brother works for a charity doing data analysis. You could, again, if you have the events management experience, those are all things that charities might need. So you can be someone who does it as part of your day job rather than as something that you do when you have a spare minute on the side. And the last one's education. So we've talked about research already. Again, educate yourself first. And I think this should be something that no matter which one of these areas you think you might be interested in or what combination, research and education is at the forefront. You need to educate yourself not just on the issue, but also how you are researching the issue. Look at statistics in terms of how to tell if research is reliable or accurate, what kind of different sources to trust, what information is going to be reliable. And in general, what I say is always check information from multiple sources. And if it's information that you agree with, check it with double the sources, because we have a confirmation bias, which means that if we see something that we go, oh God, I knew it, this thing has happened, this awful thing, I can't believe this has happened, we're more likely to, because it's something that confirms our worldview or confirms the seriousness of the issue that we care about, we tend to want to believe it. So always check. Once you've kind of educated yourself, even if you don't feel comfortable kind of then being the teacher and teaching other people, share other people's resources. When you figured out what resources are reliable, share other people's. As I said before, providing closed captions for videos, transcribing into other languages, Moderating comment sections. I'm doing this for a few people at the moment who, some of my friends who are Black and have made videos about being Black. We know right now that's probably going to get a ton of horrible comments. And so volunteering and saying, hey, I can moderate the comments on your video so you don't have to look at them is amazing. Create things yourself, share things, kind of be a voice other people can share to educate themselves. Maybe your cause is something that you think should be taught in schools, right? So maybe you want to work with educational institutions or support organizations that bring your cause into schools, campaign to change the curriculum, or try and think about running assemblies or workshops in schools to try and educate within a educational setting, as well as kind of educating on social or through journalism or things like that. So hopefully you've kind of been writing down as I've been going through some ideas of how your specific cause that you started with right at the beginning might be helped by each of these areas. But I'm going to give you a few more minutes to, if there's anything else you want to add, for you to add it. And again, I'm going to jump in the chat and give some examples that people come up with if anyone needs inspiration. Charlie Left Clues has a really interesting location-specific piece of information. In the US, monthly donations are taxed less than one-time donations, so your nonprofit can use more of your donation if you give monthly. So again, it's all about research. It's all about looking at the specifics of where you are, looking at the best way in order to help with the resource that you can, maximize those resources. Eli saying they're lucky to have some editing software like Photoshop and InDesign, using them daily for uni work, but isn't sure about how best to get the resource and graphics out there and seen. So Dorothy, hello Dorothy, has suggested just get them out there, you know, just post them. It sounds silly, but things will get out. If you post them, people will share. Drew has suggested reach out to some social media accounts related to the issue or non-profits. Agree with both of those. You absolutely can. If you have a skill that you want to donate, reach out to when you've done your research and you find these organizations or charities or accounts that are doing the work already. Absolutely, message them, say, hi, I have some experience with graphic design. Here's some examples of stuff that I've done. If, you know, contact me, I'm willing to donate my skills to you for a campaign. I can make, you know, Instagram stories or Twitter cards or kind of that kind of information. Absolutely, it's all about kind of having that confidence in what you're doing to be able to reach out to people, because you got to remember, these people are people who care about the thing that you care about as well. They will be excited to have your help, or if they already have, you know, enough people who are donating something, it's not because you're, you know, awful and terrible and you can do nothing to help. It's just because right now they kind of have all the people that they need. In the same way that oftentimes you'll have food banks or donation spaces in which they're like, thank you very much for donating all of these cans of soup, but we have enough cans of soup. We need something else right now. So sometimes some of your skills will be more relevant or less relevant, and that's totally fine. Lilacs Moon, education can also be spreading links to massive Google Doc folders full of revolutionary theory. Absolutely. There have been some really exciting links to Google Drives that have been shared recently, or where people have basically compiled lots and lots of different information, different people's, you know, other Google Docs that other people have started, news articles, Twitter threads, documentaries that people can go, and it's like a one-stop shop. Charlie left clues. The Harry Potter Alliance's great toolkit for social media best practice for activists. Yes, I actually helped with one of their activism toolkits, fandom activism toolkits. Can highly, highly recommend the Harry Potter Alliance. I also did this workshop at one of their events. They are amazing. So they are not affiliated with the author of said books, but they started as a group of fans who wanted to campaign for having fair trade chocolate for Harry Potter branded products. So the whole thing was wanting to make sure that there was no mispractice within the producing of these. I think it was chocolate frogs at the time is what was being produced. And since then, they have done so much other stuff. They have branched out hugely. They have the Granger Leadership Academy, which happens every year, which is like an activist convention that happens in a different city every year in America. I've been quite a few times, and it's blooming brilliant. And so they create these toolkits that you can use, which are based on different fandoms. So they have one for Marvel, they got one for Harry Potter, they've got one for Doctor Who. And essentially, by focusing on the issues covered in a fandom or a piece of media, they talk about ways in which you can help with that particular kind of issue, whether it is gender bias and sexism, or immigration, or whatever it might be. So they're a really exciting organisation. Okay, so hopefully you've now essentially have your cause that you have decided to be interested in or care about or focus on. And we made it as specific as possible. You have looked at your skills and resources that you have available to you, and also what kind of person you are and what kind of role you want to play within a movement or within your activist work. You've also kind of had a look at these big areas, kind of general areas of change making, of politics and direct action, charities and education, and kind of had a few thoughts about how your particular issue might fit into those. So next, we're going to get more specific again, and we're going to talk about choosing a goal. So this is, I've got a nice little graphic here. If you have ever worked in anything corporate or had to do a kind of workshop before, SMART goals are potentially something you have had to talk about or had to put into practice. And it's because it's a really good idea. SMART goals are a very good idea, however corporate they might be. Basically, they are a way of making sure that your goals are, well, exactly what it says here, that they are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. What does that mean? Well, the graphic says it all. Specific, so a goal which is specific is one where you have said it. It is specific. It is something you have put out there. You can summarize it in a sentence. What is it that you want to do or accomplish? But that's not enough. It can't just be specific. You also have to be measurable. So how are you going to track your progress? Is it possible to say, yes, this has been done? This is a goal which has been achieved. Is it achievable? Is it reasonable with the resources that you have? Is it relevant? Does it actually help your goal? Does the goal actually help your cause that you're trying to fight for? And also, when is the deadline for your goal? You need a deadline. So in this way, if you wanted you could have a SMART goal, or you could have a goal, that was, I want to stop homophobia in schools. Cool. Not a SMART goal, because I don't know when your time is time bounded for it. That is not achievable for one person with your resources. How is that measurable? Have you thought about ways of working out whether homophobia is in schools or not? And that's a huge task. So being more specific is always smarter. I'll go this way, there we go, smarter. But it's also going to make it so much easier for you to feel a sense of purpose and accomplishment. It's going to be so much better than having this really overwhelming, huge goal that you don't feel like you can ever, like you're digging into it, but you never really get, like you step back and it's still as big as it ever was. You're only chipping off a tiny bit at a time. So you always want to go as small as possible for these goals. So I have put here some examples. I've done a lot of X's because I didn't want to get too specific, because I didn't want people to feel like this was about a particular issue or another, because these are applicable to whichever ones you want to apply them to. So get a certain law changed in my state. So it might be that there's a very, very specific law which you would like to change, which you want to update, and you specifically want to do it for your country or your state or your wherever it is that has kind of where level the laws come from in your country. You want to get something added to the high school curriculum. So at the moment, for example, we've had stuff in the UK about getting the British Empire put onto the school curriculum, that we need to learn about the atrocities that have been committed by the British, as well as kind of very like, oh, Henry VIII and his wives, what a crazy little country we are. Organising a fundraiser to raise X amount, so being specific with the amount that you want to raise for a local community garden, for example, I put down. And it might be that you say, okay, and specifically we need to raise it by 6 months' time because that is the deadline for X. Or even if there's not an external deadline, putting a deadline in place for yourself is really helpful. Another example, run an awareness campaign at my university for X cause, whatever it is that you're interested in. That specifically being at your university, we're making it very particular. Or even, I want to get a job in this particular charity sector after uni. If the goals here seem too big that I've given, split them into smaller goals instead. So an example I will give is if you wanted to eradicate homophobia within your school, right? You go to school right now and you want to get rid of homophobia within your school. It's pretty big, it's pretty broad, and that's kind of scary. So maybe you want to look at making it smaller. So you might say, well, I feel like some things that I could do in order to make that happen would be, I would need to educate the teachers, I would need to educate the students, or someone would need to educate the students. We could do some kind of poster campaign in school. And so you might think about some ideas about how you can make that happen, and then make one of those your SMART goal. So you might say, by the end of this year, I want to have invited a speaker to come in and run a workshop with all of the different years of the school for PHSE about LGBT History Month. Very specific, but if you know that it's driving towards your actual goal that is relevant in this case, then that's something really useful. So this potentially is going to take a little bit more time. Feel free to think of a number of different goals and then kind of pick one that you want to start with. So for example, the example that I gave of like eradicating homophobia from my school, the getting a speaker to come in, educating those teachers, putting something in place for students to be educated, running a poster campaign. Those are all different goals. So you can write them all down, but just know for the next step, we'll pick one of them and we can kind of continue with that one. And at any stage of what we've done today, if you want to backtrack another time and kind of redo this workshop with another idea, go for it. That's always something you can do. So again, I'm going to go over to the chat. I'm going to see if there are any ideas that we can steal. So the Adventures of Polyphony says there's also a thing called smarter goals, which adds evaluation and readjusting so you can keep working on your goal if you didn't achieve it the first time round. This is absolutely true. So this is kind of, because this is your first step goal, it's a SMART goal. The smarter thing is really, really useful and highly recommend it because you always want to be doing your best, but sometimes it takes actually doing something to realize that it's not going to work. So if you, using the example that I just gave of getting speakers to come into your school, that can be your goal. But if you come up against the problem of your head teacher being so against it that you are not allowed to do it, you gotta work out a new goal, or that then becomes your new goal. So always be aware of the fact that you haven't failed if you don't manage to get this goal done. You are creating it with the idea that it will be achievable, but you don't know what external factors might come in that might change that. And so you always want to have a goal to drive towards, but it is not something to feel awful and like a huge failure and like you've let everyone down or let the cause down if it's not something that's achievable. That within that particular time frame or within those particular parameters. So yeah, don't beat yourself up about that. Just kind of as we just said, want to evaluate, readjust, change to a different goal or a different tact. Okay, Kristen A has given us a goal. Start a podcast with the charity I work for, discussing learning disabilities in relation to topics that people rarely talk about, for example, sex education. That is so exciting. That is really interesting. And what's really exciting about that is a goal that a lot of people wouldn't have come up with. They would have had exactly the same issue or cause that they care about, but they would have come up with a different idea of how to achieve, how to fight for that cause. They would have had different skills, they would have had different interests. They would have come up with something completely different. And it's often a lot of those things working together that's going to make a difference. So Ursula has another one, very education-based, this one, which is really interesting. Write a literature review of X cause and get it published, / start a portfolio of my findings. Could then do X amount per year depending on the time available. Very researcher-based. Again, knowing that researcher role is something that you really have an affinity to is so useful. We've got 3 more minutes of this trying to be trying to kind of think of our SMART goal that we want to look into. A couple of people will say to be watched later again. Yes, absolutely. This is going to be on the channel. You can watch it at any time, come back to it. Absolutely can do. I would say you can come to me running this workshop in real life, but at the moment that is not possible. We are all in lockdown, which is why we decided to do it online, making it as accessible as possible. Also, once this goes live, I will be putting closed captioning on it, so people can access it if they need closed captions as well. Chara's goal is finding a local organisation that is providing space, exposure and opportunity for X cause and volunteer with them. An amazing goal, really, really great. And then what will probably happen with that is you'll be able to do a kind of a quick fire version of this process again and come up with another goal. Or there will be a goal in which they're working towards that you'll be able to slot yourself into. It's always useful, as I again keep reiterating during this workshop, to start small and then kind of build from there. So if your eventual goal is to do something across an entire country, start with a very particular area, perfect that, and then you can roll it out elsewhere, or you can give those resources to other activists who will be able to do it in their own regions or their own countries. That is so, so important to know your limits and to be collaborating with other people who are as driven and excited as you are, and sharing your resources, sharing your knowledge, all that good stuff. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the next activity. So that is making a list. We love a list. We love a good list. So basically, we're recapping. Every activity we do, we're recapping, but I think it's important too. You have your cause. We've been very specific about the cause that we want to focus on. Then we have just looked at our skills and resources, what we have available to us, what we can bring to the table. We've had a look at the kind of person we are, the kind of role we would want to play in a more general sense, rather than just individual bitty skills. We have had a look at the 4 different areas of change making and ways in which they might be relevant, maybe thinking about what change looks like in different ways, different circumstances, different issues. And then we've also come up with a goal, a SMART goal of some kind. So now we're going to actually start making a list of what are we going to do to move forwards. We have this knowledge, we have these ideas, what are we going to do in a practical sense? So we're essentially going to do what it says on this lovely slide. Activity 6A, write a list of tangible things you can do or actions you can take to move forwards with your goal. And here I've given a full example. So the example of the cause is you have noticed homophobic comments going unchallenged by staff at your school. So your goal is to have all teachers in your school be given comprehensive training in how to shut down homophobia in the classroom. A longer term goal, maybe you started with the goal of, creating an inclusive environment in your school for LGBTQ plus students. Or maybe your first goal you thought of was like homophobia, first cause you thought of was homophobia, and then you said, I want to eradicate homophobia in schools. I want to work on homophobia in schools. And then you went specifically to, I want to eradicate homophobia in my school. And you've gone even more specific to, actually, I think that one of the reasons why it is so pervasive is that teachers allow it to continue. They allow it to happen in their lessons, they don't challenge it. And I've noticed that teachers seem very awkward when it gets brought up. They don't really know how to challenge it. So the first thing, the first step, the first goal is going to be to provide some training for them. And that's not exhaustive. You'll say, well, that's not going to end up with an inclusive school environment just from this one goal. But I can do this first, and then I can tackle the next goal, and then I can tackle the next goal. This is just one of them. So I've written down a list of potential actions or potential things that you might write down now for potential tasks that need to happen to make this goal of comprehensive training for teachers, to make that happen. So research organisations that might already do this type of training. So it might be people that you can already bring into the school to do it. Collect testimonials from students who have suffered as a result of this lack of training. So collecting evidence from research of why this is important. Maybe it's people in your school. Maybe it's looking at the effects of homophobia in general. Schedule a meeting with your head teacher to discuss the proposal. As you can see, these are not in order. These are not chronological order. This is just what kind of tasks will I have to do at some point to make this happen. Discover what current training is available to teachers at the school in other areas of pastoral care. So do they get any training to do with challenging bullying in general, challenging racist bullying? And maybe you discover actually they don't have any training at all, and then suddenly your goal might shift in the middle of this process to say, well, obviously I want them, this homophobia is a problem, but maybe there's a problem with the racism or sexism or ableism that I haven't even noticed in the school. Maybe there are people that I want to talk to who might want to create more of a comprehensive training for teachers. Research the laws in your area. So for example, anti-discrimination laws, see if any of them apply, see if there's a legal precedent for this. Those are all just some ideas. You may have other ideas of ways in which you want to go about it, but have a look at your goal and work out what are some tasks that you need to complete in order to make that happen. So for example, if your goal was something to do with getting a job in the charity sector, you might research what kind of jobs are available for your skill set. You might look at if anywhere is doing summer placements while you're at university that you can get into. You might look at some job adverts which suggest the kind of skills that are necessary to work in the area. You may, there are lots of different individual tasks that you can do. So have a little look at your goal and then think of some things that you need to do in order to make it happen. So we're going to go with, let's do 5 minutes on this, just to kind of start making a list of stuff that you might need to do. Three more minutes on this at the moment. Obviously, I'm doing this for the in a condensed workshop atmosphere, but these are all tasks that you could spend a long time on. You could rethink about tasks that you can, check back in with, that might change sometimes for you. So basically, take as much time as you need to after this workshop to look over what you've written down, to digest, to evaluate, to spend more time on, to ask other people about. Sometimes we don't necessarily know what our skills are or our resources are ourselves. Sometimes we need other people to say, oh, you're really good at this, or I've always thought that you're someone who's really impressed me with your whatever it might be. So maybe after this workshop, go and talk to someone else, see if they agree with your thoughts on this. Ursula actually has just put into the chat, I've written this down so I can do it in more depth later because I think there's a whole lot I need to do first. First step, I think, would be more research and summarize what I still need to learn. That's amazing, Ursula. Thank you so much for writing that message, because that may well be true. This is an activity that might just expose to you how much you still need to figure out about the thing that you care about. Maybe you're not sure about the laws around it. Maybe you're not sure about who else is doing work in this area. Maybe you have a lot of ideas about how you might make change in your school because you know that environment, but you don't actually know how this is going to play out at university or in a company that you're about to go work for. So really, really good idea, Ursula. Also, a question in the chat, when reaching out to groups to volunteer services, is it a good idea to have a short resume to send? I think that's going to depend on the type of service that you're offering. I think that having a resume, if it's something like social media management, stuff like that, that's really useful. If it's to offer, graphic design skills, having a portfolio is probably going to be more useful than having a resume, showing that you have got relevant examples of the kind of stuff that they might need. So now that hopefully you have some tasks ahead of you, think now about the question B here. What are potential challenges and how might they be overcome? So if you can already see a potential challenge, so for example, in the example that we have here, schedule a meeting with the head teacher to discuss the proposal. Maybe you know that the head teacher doesn't normally meet with students, or maybe you know that they also haven't challenged homophobia when they've seen it, so you are maybe anticipating them not being that interested. Or maybe there aren't, when you're looking to get testimonials from students, a lot of them are not out and wouldn't want to be identified within that testimonial, and they feel like the testimonial would have to be so specific that they might be outed. These are all particular issues or challenges. So think about potential ways in which things might be tricky for you, or might go wrong, or might be more difficult than just simply doing a task. And also think about ways of either overcoming them, or ways of getting around them, or ways in which you're willing to compromise. So you might say, well, actually, we're not going to pressure people into giving testimonials if they're worried about being outed. So what is a way in which we can overcome that challenge? Well, if the point of the testimonials is to show evidence of how this is affecting students, maybe we look at the ways in which homophobia in general affects teenagers. So we might look at studies and things like that, because in that way we're not having to potentially out anyone. So having a think about how you might overcome these challenges. The challenges might not come up at all. They might be that you're just being cautious. But it's useful to have a think about ways in which you might overcome potential challenges as they come up. So we're just going to do a couple of minutes of this. We're almost at the end. This is kind of the last big task. This activity 6 is the last big task we're doing, and we're just going to talk about afterwards a couple of post-workshop tasks to do to kind of continue this on forwards. So take a couple of minutes and think about the potential challenges that you might come across. So in the chat, Lilacs Moon has said, time or energy constraints is a main challenge. We have to be mindful of our capacity. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a cliche for a reason. Agreed, absolutely. That's a really interesting challenge that's not specific to necessarily any one task you might have written down, but just in general. Absolutely, we want to make sure that we're being safe, that we're allowing ourselves time to recover from things, that we're giving ourselves a break, that we're not feeling overwhelmed with everything that's going on, because although it may feel like you're getting a lot done right now because all you're doing is trying to fight for a cause, ultimately you're going to burn yourself out. Really, really good point. And again, for anyone who's doing this not live, obviously everyone who's live is putting stuff in the chat, which is amazing, but anyone who's doing this not live, if you have, well, for this particular exercise, a challenge that you're not sure how to overcome, put it in the comments. See if other people have any ideas of how to help. And this goes for anything that we've talked about so far. If you struggled with any of these activities, or you're struggling with them, you can ask people in your life. You can ask friends or family members or people that you work with. But you could also ask it in the comments. See what people think. See if they have any ideas that might be able to help. In the chat, we've had my main challenge is having to navigate a very unpredictable chronic health or disability situation, so I don't take too much on and they get a flare up and can't finish what I took on. I mean, a good way of doing that is doing the same kind of exercise that we've done over this workshop and making things more and more specific. So actually, maybe your task that you take on isn't trying to organize this big, huge thing. It's just taking one of these tasks that I've written down on this list. So researching organizations who already do this type of training, and that's your goal. And so you're able to complete a smaller goal that's all building towards a much larger one, but it allows you to feel accomplishment, to know, well, I know that I can only really be working on something like this that I need to solidly be working on for 20 minutes at a time, or 20 minutes a day, or an hour a week, or whatever it is. Being honest with yourself and your time resources. You know, earlier when we were talking about resources we do and don't have, and how we might need other people to fill in for those different resources that we're lacking in, or these skills we're lacking in, that's a really useful one to think about. So the last thing that we're going to do for this one, very, very quickly, is that last letter C, putting these in chronological order. So look at the list that you've made, look at the list of kind of tasks that you're looking to complete, and just number them from 1 through to how many you have. Which is the one that you are going to do first? And when you look at that first one, is that the first thing you should be doing? Is there another task that needs to happen before that, before you can dig in and start going? Do you need to get other people involved? Do you need to do more research? You know, have a quick think about that and put these in the order that make most sense. And it might be that actually the order is, I know this one has to be first, but actually the other tasks, the order depends on what happens with this one. So put that as number 1, and then the rest of them as number 2 for now. Oh, Kristen has also put the difficulty of relying on, or the challenge of relying on other people can sometimes be an issue. Absolutely, I think this is why finding a group that's already doing the work, finding people who are as excited and dedicated to it as you, is a must. You've got to be working with people who are as enthused about something as you, or who are very open about not being as enthused, and will be very open about the idea of like, well, I don't really want to be volunteering every week, but I can volunteer this one weekend. And that's enough to know people's limits, to know people's resources, to know people's interest. So getting that from the get-go can be really useful. Okay, so we've kind of reached the end of the workshop at large, the main activities within the workshop itself. Thank you so much for joining me for that section. I'm just going to talk now about a few things to do post-workshop. So obviously this is a workshop, a list of exercises that you can continue to do, that you can revisit when you've kind of completed a goal, or when a new issue that you care about arises. So this kind of section that has just gone is something that you can kind of revisit. This post-workshop stuff is things that you can do afterwards, when you kind of had a thought about how to think about what we've already talked about. So the first one being working out a schedule. You want to make this a habit, a regular thing, something that you just have in your life, whether it is that you're doing research, so you set up a Google alert for the thing that you care about, that you are following people on social who are talking about it, following organizations that are talking about it, signing up to newsletters. Maybe you want to create a small group of friends who meet up every Friday evening between this hour and this hour to support each other, maybe and schedule kind of meetings in, and who want to fight maybe the same cause, maybe a different one. Maybe it's something that you do where you say, actually, I want to, my time constraint on this goal is 3 months' time, so I'm going to put in at least 4 hours a week and it might not be regular, it might not be the same day every week, but it's going to be 4 hours a week that I'm going to put in, and I'm going to write it in my diary. You know, what I think is really useful and can really help with mental health, as well as kind of energy levels and excitement for a cause and drive and momentum, is treating it like it is a communal experience, making empathy a communal experience. So you get people's support, you work with people to help out, you put it into your schedule like you would any other activity that you were doing, whether it's a club or a hobby or a meeting, that it's something that you always schedule in and you make time for, however much time it is that you can put towards it. And then the other thing to do post-workshop is to take care of yourself. How are you going to ensure that you don't burn out while fighting the cause? We've kind of mentioned this in the chat already, and I've kind of talked about it a little bit, but you need to really be attuned to what you need. And that might be seeing a therapist if you can. It might be talking to people that you're friends with. It might be allowing yourself to not burn out, allowing yourself to take a break from this, allowing yourself to admit when something isn't working, or that you need more help, or that it now isn't the right time, or that you aren't the person to be doing this, that there is someone who is better equipped. You know, that is so, so important, because it is not worth it if you're driving towards this goal, but ultimately it's going to destroy you in the process. It's not worth it. There's always someone you can pass the baton to. There's always someone who is going to be able to help. So setting up a support network around you is really important. And knowing when you're scrolling through Twitter because you're trying to learn versus scrolling through Twitter to just doom scroll through all the horrible things that are happening because you feel like you have to bear witness to them. You know, really just being honest with yourself with what you need is so, so important. So taking care of yourself, I think, is the thing that I want to leave you on. Thank you so much for coming to this. If you are currently watching live, please go to the comments and write down your ideas, write down the stuff you put in the chat so that other people can learn from it or get ideas or inspiration. If you are not watching live and you have been following along with this workshop, then thank you so much. Again, in the comments, please let me know the different causes you're interested in. If you have any other ideas that we didn't cover, for people just starting out, stuff that might be useful, resources. If you see, for example, that someone is interested in homophobia in schools, or racism within the police force, or mental health within hospitals, whatever it might be, and you have some information or some resources or someone who you follow who talks about that, let everyone know in the comments, reply to those people's comments, kind of give your expertise and your knowledge as well. If you have a project that resonates with you, that you see someone has just commented saying, this is the thing I want to set up, let them know that you're interested in helping out, please. I am so grateful for all of you who have been watching this live and everyone who's watching it afterwards. This is obviously a time where there are a lot of people fighting a lot of causes, and there is change being made, and there can be, especially when people are, you know, being generous with their knowledge, being generous with their time and their resources, and really understanding that a lot of this is interconnected in a web, and what is affecting you is going to be affecting someone else who's going to have this other thing they're dealing with that's going to be information that can help this person over here. So I think the more that we're working together on this kind of stuff, the better that it's going to be for all of us. So, if you would like to find me on social media, that will be in the description. And I will also probably add some links to various organisations or websites or petitions or funds or things that are happening live that you can get involved in. I will have a little search for those tonight and put them in. So if they're not in at the moment, check back and I probably will have added them. And yeah, just look after each other, have an amazing rest of the weekend, and I will see all you guys later. Bye.